So good morning.
Good morning.
So I am here with Retha Stoddard, who's the Executive Director from Starting Point. Um, Thank you for taking time out of your day to meet with me. So if you could just start by telling us a little bit about Starting Point and what the mission of Starting Point is.
Okay. Starting Point services all of Carroll County. It's one of 12 agencies in New Hampshire. We are all members of the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We provide services throughout Carroll County, starting way back in 1981. So we're on our 36th year of providing those services. The services include shelter, 24-hour hotline, support line. We have court advocates and hospital advocates, and we service 2 courts, one in Conway, one in Ossipee, and the 2 hospitals, Memorial Hospital and Huggins Hospital. We have 2 offices for walk-in services, one in Conway and one in Wolfboro. We also provide personal advocacy, child advocacy, transportation, prevention, both for all of the schools in Carroll County and for businesses in the area. Lots of outreach opportunities, and that covers it.
Okay, so I know you touched on the services that Starting Point provides, but how do you interact with survivors of intimate partner violence? What does that look like?
Lots of different ways. It usually starts with a phone call, and we get either at the office somebody who is looking usually for a restraining order, or there's been an incident and they're calling after the incident, and they're looking for some support. And in that case, those calls actually come from the courts. So we get a lot of court calls during the day, and we just go to the court. So sometimes, I back up a little bit, the victim doesn't even know that we've been called. We just arrive and we support them through the process of a restraining order, stalking order, or if they're working on a parenting plan. And then once they receive that and they get a court date, then we have court advocates that go with them for the court. I don't know what the exact percentages are, but when an advocate helps fill out a restraining order, there is a greater chance of them getting that. I think an 85% chance of them getting the restraining order. We also get calls from the hospital if there's been a sexual assault or domestic violence, and those also come from the hospital, and we arrive without the victim having to call, and we have protocols with the hospitals for that. So then oftentimes the calls that we get start out with, I don't know what to do, where to turn, I know I need some support, and looking for what our services are. Sometimes the calls that come through the crisis line are really exploratory of, I don't know if I'm being abused. And it's usually very clear to us that there's been abuse, but helping them to come to grips with that. And other calls that we get are from people who have had past experiences, and something has come up in their life that is that they're struggling to work through. So it might start out with 15 years ago in college, this happened, and I don't know if this was a sexual assault, or I know that it's bothering me. They've just sent a child off to college, so maybe they're starting to have that come up again for them. And a good portion of our calls now that we're really getting the word out come from friends and partners who are just looking for some support for the victim, or it might be a parent of a victim. So, and we do work with teens, so we get very few calls. We're hoping on the horizon is a texting platform that we'll be able to use. We have a lot of confidentiality, so we've not been able to use technology in the past to communicate with victims. A lot of our victims don't have phone service, so they only have texting service, which we can't use because of the confidentiality piece. So that's coming up, and that's very exciting in order to get to a whole population of youth that don't use the phone.
Yeah, I think that would open up a whole new
Absolutely.
realm of possibilities for victims.
Yes.
For sure.
So the technical piece is that our crisis line, which is 24/7, people call that, an answering service takes that call. We can patch it right through, which is helpful if we have a trafficking situation, because they don't often have their own phone. So they're on maybe a payphone or somebody else's phone, and they don't want the call. They can't get a call back.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we have volunteers and staff who return those calls within, we have a protocol of returning the call within 10 minutes.
And then also from a shelter perspective, so Starting Point has is it 10-bed shelter?
We have a capacity for 13.
13 now, okay.
They're always full.
Yeah, always full, and it's women and children?
It's women and children, and it's, in my experience, it's almost always an even number of women and children. So I have currently have 5 in the house and 3 that visit.
So how does that process work as far as determining whether someone can screen in for the shelter?
The screening. It's a really important process because we are the only shelter of any kind in Carroll County. So we're actually coming up on a season that's really hard for my advocates, because people who have been homeless and living in the national forest are starting to experience some cold nights, and they'll start calling, and they, through no judgment of mine, they can be very savvy about presenting as victims of domestic or sexual violence. And so the screening process is really important because we have such a limited capacity for taking people into the shelter.
Right.
So we have about a 3-page questionnaire that we go through, and very well-trained advocates. So a volunteer might take the call and go through the first level of screening, and then a staff member will call back and go a little bit, deeper into that. Our shelter is for imminent danger and for people who have experienced homelessness due to their domestic or sexual violence. Our shelter is for women and children, but we shelter all victims of domestic violence. So if we have a male client, we have to put them into a hotel, and sadly there are very, very few facilities for men. So it's something as a director that I'm hoping we do a little bit better work on.
Absolutely.
But what we're finding is that if we do a good job screening and ask, what would you, if you could have it your way, what would you really want? And so recently I had a woman say, I would go back home. Well, home was out west, and she had no funds to get her back home, and her family out west couldn't afford to get her back. So through a combination of grants that we work with and some private donations, I was able to put her and her 2 young children on a bus and got her home, which was safe, and connected her with the agency out there. We did the work to help her know what her resources were when she arrived. And so that was a cost, a great cost. I think it was about $1,800, but less than putting a person in shelter over a period of time.
Right.
And then she would have been stuck in shelter because it would have taken her a good period of time to make that money to get home.
Right.
I had a call not that long ago that when we got down to it, she was really looking for shelter. We didn't have room. We were ready to put her in a hotel, and she said, yeah, I just need a couple of days until I can get my check, and then I can go home. And so we asked her how much money she needed, and it was affordable to us. We gave her the gas and some money for food, and she was safe on the road, and gave us a call when she arrived, and again, connected her to those services. There are some complications with that, which are sort of interesting, and I find interesting and are part of the complexity of the work that we do. By removing her, there was a case that was left open because she couldn't afford to come back. She didn't want to have to come back. It wasn't safe for her to come back. So as an activist, I want that case to go all the way through because that means that a perpetrator is held accountable. As an advocate, I will work for her. So finding out what she needs. If she wanted to come back, we would have found a way to fly her back and keep her safe. But she did not want that. She wanted to just move on. And that's, unfortunately, a lot of, a number of victims, that's the case, is they really need to be done and move on. And they know that justice is not what in their mind, it's not what's going to happen in court, unfortunately. It's a very archaic situation for a lot of our victims. Yeah, we have definitely come a long way. I love the old Virginia Slims commercial. Remember the "We've Come a Long Way, Baby"?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so there was a feminist T-shirt that said, "We haven't come that far, and don't call me baby."
I love that. That's awesome.
We have come a long way. Yeah. So part of the work for me as the executive director and for our advocates who do outreach is to work with systems to help educate them and to just get out into the general public. When we're doing something like a book discussion, we're actually talking to a potential juror who may someday be able to have that understanding.
Yeah, it has to be a coordinated response, and it's not.
Right. When people ask what's the solution to this problem, I usually just it takes me a minute to narrow in on it, but the truth is that it has to all work at the same time.
Right.
There's so much, digging out some of the mold in our society and culture and the way that we treat women, the way we treat victims, the way we treat children, and changing the laws and so much to it. You don't have enough. You don't have enough charge on your.
Good thing I plugged in my laptop. So one of the questions is, what is your personal role with survivors, and how do you come in contact with them in your line of work? I think you've pretty much answered that.
Sometimes it's a cocktail party.
Right.
Absolutely. For me, I actually was just in Krippala for a music workshop. And we all introduced ourselves. There were 35 people in the room, mostly women. And I introduced myself as the executive director, the Starting Point. We service victims of domestic and sexual violence. And at lunch, I spent most of my lunch talking with people, disclosing that they had been a victim in the past. And this was a natural singer was the name of the workshop. And there were 2 women in there who had been abused of their voice. It was childhood abuse that led them to not use their voice singing. So the complexities of this are just, that was eye-opening for me.
How long have you been doing this kind of work?
So I've been executive director for just entered my 2nd year. I started 3 years ago as the prevention specialist. There was some health issues with other staff members. So the day I started work, I started actually as the family violence prevention specialist, works directly with DCYF and the courts. So I got a lot out of that. And that advocate came back. I went back to my prevention, but it was recognized that I could do more. So I became the direct service coordinator and outreach. And then our executive director left and they offered me the position. I had been a volunteer and a board member before that, and my mom was one of the first court advocates back in the
So the Starting Point was
1981. There was I just recently met the woman who started it. She was a victim and she got out alive, and she decided that she wanted to try to help others, so she just offered shelter. There was underground networks in this area and throughout the country back in the 60s and 70s. I think there's that a lot came to light when our veterans started to from Vietnam started to ask for their rights, and there was a lot more understanding about PTSD. And then just the short version is that women who had been victimized in their own home or who had been victims of rape displayed the same characteristics, the same, they had PTSD. And I think it started to just come to light that, how could your brain react the same way as a veteran who was, being shot at and going through all the atrocities of war. So that's all in the mix. But in this area, it was shelters in people's private homes. My siblings are quite a bit older than me, and we grew up in the Boston area, and my sisters did some of that work. And so as a kid, and my mom, but as a kid, I remember, middle of the night visitors, and they were not very happy. And there was sometimes a kid there, and it probably happened to me once, but I would say that, I lost a couple of pairs of sneakers to the kid that came, because they came with nothing.
Right.
And I knew even as a kid that wasn't something I was supposed to talk about outside of home. So in Carroll County, 81 is the sort of official start to it, but we were late coming to it, and there were some early agencies like ours starting in the 70s.
So I think you touched on it earlier as far as like working with the courts and the hospitals and the child advocacy centers. How does Starting Point, how do you guys go about with interacting with other agencies and service providers to kind of keep that continuum?
Partnerships are so important.
Yeah, to keep the partnerships alive.
It's a lot of work, a lot of really important work. So, and it was done before I arrived. My mom did some of that court advocacy work, and when I started doing the work, I would come home and tell her, "Mom, the schools are calling us to go and do work in the schools," and she was delighted in that. Well, one day I said to her, "Mom, I got when I was new, I said, Mom, I got a call from the police." And she said, "Are you being arrested?" I said, "No, they call us now." And she was so over the moon about that, because there was a real disconnect. So the work was done before I got there. And what we have protocol in the hospitals and the courts. So if a victim shows up at the hospitals, as I said, the hospital calls us. The victim doesn't even know that we're coming. One of the things that we have to really help them understand is that we're there for them. We're not connected to the hospital. We're not connected to the court. We're not part of the prosecution. We are advocates with a very high level of confidentiality and privilege. And so that's our first job, to help them understand that, because when they're in trauma, they're like, one more person.
Right.
No, but so we have some MOUs with, we have one with DCYF. So our family violence prevention specialist works 20 hours a week with them, and follows all the cases that have a co-occurrence. And then the hospitals and the courts, and then we work hard to get into the schools, and we bring a curriculum of healthy relationships, and most of the schools are open to that. We have one school in Carroll County who just has no interest in having us be there. My job is to create some more of those partnerships. So for Title IX in the colleges, and we have a couple of colleges, we don't have campuses, but we do have, some classrooms and some online opportunities here. And so we're their crisis center, so trying to make some inroads there. And as I said, we work with the police. So the lethality assessment program brings us in close contact with the police. And so schools, courts, hospitals. I'm trying to do some more work with health centers, because we're not getting calls from them. We're finding out that clients, a lot of this work comes from just finding out who clients have worked with, and whether those partners have connected with us. So getting out there and getting to the health centers and saying, if you have a client who presents, please give us a call and we can support. I'm blessed to come into it after we have crisis intervention under, we really have it under control. We know what to do. And there's always something to learn, and there's always, best practices to practice. But we're poised at a place where the awareness is offering us more partnerships. People come to us instead of us having to dig them out, and just in a place for more transitional work. So rather than cycling back, we got them through the crisis and then so long, good luck. I ask my advocates, call back until they tell you they don't need you anymore. Like, just calling in to check and see if there's anything else I can do for you. Were you able to get to your appointment? Do you need help with transportation, childcare? Did you know that such and such is available to you? Because things unfold so strangely sometimes with a victim. The complexities, they don't even know what they need sometimes.
Right.
And they've been so immersed in this trauma that they don't recognize that they have these other options. So I think the longer we stay in touch with our clients, a couple of things can happen on just a bunch of levels. We can help them be free of it finally, not be at risk for additional perpetration or re-victimization or just bad relationship choices. But also our advocates have the joy of staying in touch and knowing that somebody has found that freedom, opened that door to a new life.
So how do you, I know you well enough to know that you find this work personally rewarding, but how do you prevent yourself from getting burnt out?
Well, I'm just getting started, so I'm just getting started. The presence of my granddaughter certainly is hopeful and helpful. So, being open to all the joys. I have a life free of domestic and sexual violence, so I we're all at risk, but I have healthy relationships, so and very supportive ones, and a lot of people who do the work. So my kitchen table, when family is around it, there's psychologists and therapists and family members that do the work that I do, can be some pretty intense conversations.
I imagine. And
can also be the most ridiculous conversations. Like, you would not know there were PhDs and masters at the table. So joy is a huge thing. And staying educated, really staying on top of the best practices, because the best practices are a result of progress. So I think that's, all of my siblings who do the work have said, when I said to them, what's the most important thing for me to remember as I go forward? And they say, educate. No matter how long you're in it, continue to educate. And I absolutely agree with that. And I get outdoors, and my reading list is Healing from Trauma, Live Through This, Stories of Victims of Domestic and Sexual Violence, Charlotte's Web.
Little granddaughter on the side, yeah.
There's no romance novels, because I find those to have a lot of domestic violence.
Yes, I know. My reading list is similar. So have you had any aha moments in the last couple of years? I'm sure you've had many, but any that stand out to you as far as had you kind of encourage you to change the practice, the way you practice?
Yeah, I was recently at a conference where we were asked to think about our aha moment that brought us to the work, and I started to panic, because we're supposed to share that with our our table mate, and for me, having been raised in the work, I didn't have an aha moment. Long before we were talking about privilege, my family had a code that you're a white upper class person who has privilege, and so if you walk through a door, you better hold it open for whoever's coming behind you. I think probably the most it wasn't so much an aha moment, like I hadn't thought about it before, but that I realized that there was some meat to it, and that is that the continued advocacy, there's so much involved. It's not just getting them through that court appearance or getting them out safe. There's the complexities, and the variety of the complexities is what we really need to pay attention to and have more of us doing that work. I think doing the work of transition is the aha for me, and that we don't have a time limit on how long people stay in shelter, but recently we've had a couple of clients who have been there too long, not due to anything they've done, but there's not available housing, affordable housing for us in this area, and they needed so much catch up and needed to go through so many resources. And then we started to see, it's happened to 3 clients, so I don't know if you can call that a trend, but we started to see some slipping back, the loss of some self-esteem after they'd started to gain that because they feel like failures, still stuck in shelter. And they feel depressed by not being able to get the housing, that independence that they're ready for and they're looking for it. So we're really looking at that, how to help them, because I don't have a solution to getting people out sooner, because that involves having affordable housing, and we don't have that. But I think that we need to implement more programming and prepare more for that. So.
And then, are there any specific cases that you can think of that you felt particularly proud of, where you really helped somebody, just somebody who just always sticks with you?
Yeah. One in particular is one that is a long-term client that has, struggled just going round and round in the system. And when I was doing direct service work, it was that started that aha moment where I had a really good supervisor and asked if I could just kind of do a little bit more. There's a fine line between empowerment and enabling. And so I got a lot of supervision for it and really helped her move through a lot of situations. One was that just moving through the mental health services that she was getting and finding out that she had been stuck in it for so long that she had a medication list. I think there were 7 or 8, and I went through 2 hospitalizations with her. One was forced, and one was she tried to self-admit, but then she ended up being admitted. And so in the end, of the 7 medications that she had just sort of been on, they're all gone now.
Wow.
And she's on medications that are very specific to what her, I guess, organic needs are, because I think she was being medicated for being a victim. And I think that, I don't have that background, but I can play a psychologist on TV, I think. But knowing that people are being misdiagnosed or being overdiagnosed, or I don't know what the terms are for it, but she had medications that were problematic. So helping her see that through and helping her to advocate for herself in that way. Yeah. And her dissociation has significantly been reduced over the past year. A lot of our work was to get her to the right therapy, to help her. A lot of our clients are really turned off by therapy, and we can be peer counselors, but we do not have that expertise, and it's not something we even try to get into, but we understand enough to know. There's a gap between when they come to us and getting them to mental health services and getting them to the appropriate mental health services. We don't have a lot of trauma-informed therapists out there. And that's really problematic for our folks. And some of them feel that there's conspiracy and that they're being made to feel that they're to blame. And there's a lot. That's another whole interview, I'm sure that.
Right. No, wonderful. Well, I think that does it. I appreciate your time.